A groan escaped from Pinky's lips. That had not been a restful sleep by any stretch of the imagination. She rubbed her throbbing head as she began to stand up. Her body was racked with aches at the moment she tried. She lay back down and took several deep breaths, her senses being hit with overwhelming stench of decay. She pulled her head away from the ground, coughing as the stench began to gag her. She shot her eyes open as she tried to look around. However, it was far too dark for her to see anything. She fumbled around in her backpack, reaching for her lantern, before pulling it out and turning it on. The floor, she sat in the mess of rotten wood and grime, the normal pristine floors of Sugar Cube Corner. It had begun with the other world now. She lifted her head up and looked around, seeing the walls and furniture were also rotting away. Bodies of ponies that hung from the corners of the room. Bad conflagrations were placed on various counters of the shop. Pinky quickly turned her head away, closing her eyes from the images. She had seen so much of it already, yet she still wasn't getting any easier seeing any of this. She had kind of wished that waking up would have been made this place go away, as if she were in some bad dream. At least I wasn't attacked by a monster. She then groaned as she began to stand up to her wobbly feet. She then looked down at the blood-soaked bandages that covered her legs. Images of herself attacking assaulted her mind. Even as the events replayed in her mind, she remembered each cut of her own hoof, ending the life of herself. The pain of guilt coursed through her. She didn't want to kill her, but in the state of self-defense, she hadn't given it another option. If this town hadn't been wrapped of everything, if only things went back to the way they always were. "Wait!" Pinky said. She thought it reached her mind. She looked around Sugar Cube Corner once more, before looking down at her own feet, reviewing the grime-riddled floor. Sugar Cube Corner didn't look this way when I came in. She then looked up loud, and she began to realize what was happening around her. Which means, oh no, that siren didn't go off. I'm still in this other world. Pinky then began to panic on the realization hit. No, calm down, Pinky, Pinky said, calming herself down in deep breaths. If you panic, then nothing good will happen. She shook her head and before gently tapping into her hooves. She stay calm, and just think. Her heartbeat began to slow down as she managed to rationalize with herself. Okay, first things first, she said, looking at her legs. I need to change these bandages. She reached into her bag and grabbed the bandages, and then she put them before. She quickly unwrapped her wounds, inspecting each of them, just to make sure they were properly healing, before reapplying the fresh bandages. She used up the last of the gauze, but she felt satisfied with the fresh wrappings. I'd probably be better if I had some disinfectant, but I gotta work with what I have, she sighed softly. So now what? She asked herself. As she reached into her backpack and pulled out her map, she unfurled with it and tried to see where else she would go. She gasped in shock. The map was blank now. The entire map that only consists of one world. Nowhere. Nowhere? I'm not anywhere? She asked herself, confused. She pressed the map looking for any clue as to what would have happened to the old one. But there were no clues to be had. Letting out a defeated sigh, she placed the map back into her bag. I guess I should get going to look at my surroundings before I decide where to go next. She softly gulped down a bit of anxiety. She wasn't so sure what to expect outside, now that that siren had turned the world back to normal. Alright, you've got a lot already, Pinky, and you can handle this. She softly motivated herself as she gripped the lantern in her mouth. Standing up, she headed for the door, and she softly pushed it open, expecting a blast of cold air. Walking out of the store, she found that Ponyville had succumbed to the other world. The entire street paved with the rotting floor, littered with holes that showed the metal framing that held it together above the dark, bottomless pit, the houses that mutated, decrepit, rust-colored shacks that were falling apart at the seams. The fog only still illuminated the part of the town, but it was all as black as the sky. The only light that penetrated the area was that one that came from her lantern. She carefully looked around before stepping down in the front steps of the shop. She didn't have any idea where she would have to head first. The other version of herself hadn't dropped any clues, and if she hadn't, she didn't want to go back to find out. Suddenly, a loud thud hit her ears as the ground shook slightly. She looked around at the ground carefully as another tremor passed through, a few pebbles shaking at her hooves. Pinky's heart began to race. She had no idea what this meant. It could be anything good. She looked around her, trying to find the source of the grumbling. Arrgh! Came the groaning monster Pinky had become familiar with. She quickly then turned around in the direction as her phonograph began to pick up the sound of static. Slowly crawling out of the darkness was a groaner, hobbling its way over towards her. There's no way he's the source. The thoughts ran through Pinky's head for a moment, when suddenly she was deafened by a loud roar that cut through the foggy air. The rumbling picked up its speed, as if the source was now running. Pinky took a few steps away from the groaner, but not sure where she would go. The groaner groaned as it tried to move faster. Pinky couldn't help but notice that it looked as if it was trying to escape. But escape from what? Grrrr. The groaner let out a final cry of pain from the darkness. From the massive mouth appeared, biting onto the creature. Taking it one bite, it swiveled its head back up before chomping the groaner in a single bite. Pinky stared in shock at the giant monster before her. There was a single body, a large mouth in front with no eyes. Its skin was curved into a pink, running down straight back, large muscular legs that held its entire frame. It was as if someone had taken off a pony's head and neck and put a giant mouth on its body. It stood as tall as a dragon. It let out another roar, knocked Pinky back to her senses. It had just finished its meal and was looking for its next one. Pinky then turned onto her heels and ran with all of her might. The creature let out a roar as it began to chase, every stomp of its legs on the ground under her hooves. Her heart was pounding as she tried her best to run. She constantly felt her hooves were about to slip from the shaking ground. She panted like crazy, rushing air to her lungs. She felt her had a massive thud behind her. She then looked around her shoulder and saw the creature had tried to bite down on her. Its head crashed into the floor. It quickly pulled its head out, letting out a pained roar as it began running again. She watched it run as its loud thudding feet doing its best to keep up with her. However, it was slower than her, and she knew it. This thing wasn't nearly as fast as the last thing that chased her before. Confidence built up inside of her. She turned to face the roar ahead of her. She made a quick turn, noticing the path ended before her. She quickly ran, looking behind her as she saw the creature run straight out of the building, letting out another pained roar. I can do this. I can outrun this thing, she thought to herself, as she felt the confidence skyrocket. She didn't know what it was, but she could outrun it. She then looked ahead of her and saw the rotting town past her with every footstep. But where do I outrun it to? She asked herself, not sure of how to answer. She then heard another loud roar as the tremors under her legs began once again. It was coming after her again, but it didn't seem too bright. It was a thing to be feared. It could eat her if she wasn't careful, but she could get away from it. She quickly made a turn around to the other bend, increasing the distance from the creature. Her attention was caught off by when she saw what was in the distance. It looked as if a giant gate with metal bars had been erected in the middle of the world, cutting off one of the world from another. She then ran towards it, and it could stretched up towards the sky, but she couldn't see where it ended. She then looked behind her. The pink monster was slowly starting to catch up as it mashed its jaws and roared for her blood. She then looked back up at the gate, seeing the normal-sized door open for her to fit in. She kicked herself into high gear, charged straight for the door. She then slipped through with ease and quickly slammed it shut behind her. She then stared through the metal bars. The creature came running straight for the gaze. She panted and watched it charge with all of its might straight forward. It crashed loudly against the gate, letting out a loud roar as it came to an abrupt stop. The gate was strong enough to hold it back, but it let out another roar as it stepped backwards, rushing straight towards the gate again. The bars bent slightly, but it held strong. Pinky stood there amazed, watching that creature fight with all of its strength to break through the bars, roaring and howling as it slammed its head repeatedly against the bars. A loud cracking sound echoed through the area as the creature stopped its thrashing. It lets out its grunts, and it tries to figure out the sound it meant, before it crashed its head once more into the gate. A loud crack was sounded. The large creature had found its hind leg through the floor, and it began to let out a frantic roar as it thrashed around, trying to get its foot free. The ground below cracked and gave away, the creature roaring as it clawed at the middle gate for support. The giant form soon fell to the ground, its loud roars disappearing into the sky as it fell into the bottomless pit. Pinky slowly walked towards the area he had crashed into the gate, peeking her head down towards the bottomless pit. The creature had fallen, but it was nowhere to be seen or heard anymore. The ground had soon continued to crumble away as it spread out towards the town. The whole town was slowly falling into the bottomless pit as well, as if the only place in the whole town was the area behind the metal gate. Pinky stared at the crumbling town, in shock that it was truly crumbling away, yet it almost made her look a little happy. The place that had caused her so much torment was slowly vanishing before her eyes. It had left her stranded there, but it was going away. She then turned her back towards the crumbling town to get a good look at where she currently was, before letting out another surprised gasp. She hadn't noticed where it was actually behind the gate, since she had been too focused on running. The dirt before her was littered with rocks of all sizes, spread as far as the eye could see. In the center of all the rocks of the wooden, small, but quaint and moderate windmill, it was the farm. The place that she had lived and grown when she was a foal. The farm? It's not supposed to be this close to Ponyville. She thought to herself as she began running towards it. It was familiarity, and it was comfort for calling her. The image of a ghost-like filly appeared right in front of the door as she ran closer to the house. The little filly ran forward, going towards the door to the house. Pinky had to follow it. She quickly reached for the front door, opening it, and going inside. Inside the living room, she was a ghostly image of her younger sister, Bellamina, that stood there looking at her. "But Bellamina?" she called out, dropping the lantern from her mouth as she hit the ground with a clang, rolling towards the young ghost filly, who stopped with her hoof. "I'm surprised you made it all the way here, Pinkamania," Bellamina said, the lantern's right side up. I guess you can handle the truth." "Bellamina, you're..." Pinky started, but stopped herself when she looked at her sister. "You're not really here, are you?" she said, her cheerfulness dipping as she could see the ghostly image of her sister. "You'll see the truth here." Bellamina turned and pointed, directing Pinky towards the stairs to the upper floor. "This house is your last safe haven, though after this there is no turning back." Her younger sister said obnoxiously, "What do you mean?" "Goodbye, sis," Bellamina's last words echoed as her image of her faded from the living room. Pinky could only stare at her sister and had stood, not sure what to make of what she saw. She felt a pang of sadness, yet a bit of comfort as well. It was short but brief, and it didn't last long as she wished it could have, but she had talked with her sister. She walked over to the lantern and picked it up once more in her mouth. She couldn't stop there, not now. Her sister's last words gave her a boost of strength, a boost that she could use all of this though. She looked at the stairs, and her sister had pointed too. They all led to the bath or bedrooms on the second floor. "The truth is, I guess it's time to find out what that means," she thought to herself as she looked at the careful steps up her destiny. At the top of the stairs, she was met by a wooden door. She carefully pushed it open, revealing it to be a hallway. On the side of the hallways were 4 square holes with writing below them. At the end of the hallway was another wooden door. She stepped into the hallway when suddenly the wooden door snapped closed behind her. She quickly looked at the door, trying to handle, and finding it to be locked. She let out a soft sigh as she turned her back to the hallway. Before almost jumping out of her skin again, the slender pony stood right at the end of the hallway, right outside the door on the other side. Her heart started beating as she stepped back against the door that had locked and closed behind her. However, the slender pony turned around, only to seem fazed by the last door, as if telling her she was waiting for her on the other side. She took a deep breath, tried to calm herself down in her beating heart. The very sight of the creature was instilling fear into her. She then shook her head as she calmed down. My sister said the truth was here. I have to have faith in her. Pinky carefully got back on her hooves, stepping forward slowly. She said I was ready for it. I could have managed to come this far through hell and back. I can handle this. She then took a deep breath as she turned to the first hole on the wall, reading the words written under it. Eyes gleamed over. It stalks before striking. Its tail wags in anticipation. Pinky thought of it over in her head. The square-shaped hole was just the right size for her to place one of the tiles that she had gotten from Sugar Cube Corner. She assumed that it was a riddle that meant to put one of them in the slot. She carefully looked inside her bag and went over the section. She had a bird, a snake, a cat, and a fish. This riddle refers to the cat tile. Does it? She asked herself, thinking the clue over, and she grabbed the tile and gently placed it onto the hole in the wall. The tile began to glow white, spreading out from the hole it was in. Pinky took a step back, as she watched the plate spread out to an area size of a door before her. The light had soon faded away, revealing a door in its place. She carefully opened the door, looking inside. It was a single room, almost like a closet. 4 solid walls with no description to them. Yet she felt compelled to go inside. She walked into the dark room, closing the door behind her. Suddenly, the flame on her lantern went out on its own. She then reached out to try and relight it. The room was filled with light. Projected on the walls were images. Pinky instantly recognized them as their memories. I don't know, Pinkamena. Are you sure this is a good idea? Bellamina asked as she walked through her with her bouncing older sister towards the edge of the rock farm. Of course it is, Pinky said happily as she led her younger sister. It's a super special party. I tried to invite my mother and father and Octavia, but they were all too busy. So that means you get to enjoy the fun with me. Well, I do love your parties, Bellamina smiled, and it was true what she said. The two of them had reached to the edge of the forest. We're here, Pinkamena called out happily. Who are you talking to? Bellamina asked confused. Why, the host of the party, of course, she giggled happily. Bellamina looked confused, but the confusion didn't last for long. From the forest walked this tall colt. His coat was pale and dull gray, his mane was unkempt, and all was curled into a mess of brown. He didn't look like he had gotten a good bath in the last week. The most odd of it all was that his cutie mark was that of 3 dark red balloons. Hello, Pinkamena. I see that you brought a friend, the old colt said with a smile. His voice sent shivers down Bellamina's back. See, he is the party host. He is going to throw us a super-duper, wonderfully fantastic party. Pinky bounced from side to side, pointing at his cutie mark. And see, we both have the similar cutie mark. So that means he's going to throw us the best party. Pinkamena was very excited. Of course, I've always thrown the best parties. The colt let out a deep, soft chuckle. Really? Bellamina asked it with unsure. But if her sister fully believed in this guy, then he must be all right. Besides, they were going to have a party, and parties were always fun. Come, the party is this way, the colt smiled as he turned her towards and walked back towards the forest. Yay, party time! Pinky bounced happily after the colt. Bellamina slowly followed the two. The flame of the lantern flickered back to life as the images faded from the walls. Pinky stared at the walls that had shown the images that she had long forced herself to forget about. She didn't like where this was going, but back then she was too ignorant to even realize that the colt gave off a bad vibe. She was so confused to focus on the parties. She gulped away and she opened the back door back up and ran and entered in the hallway. She looked at the hole before her with the next text written under it. The sleek and smooth, striking at its prey, its tail lets its moves. The image of a snake that came to her mind had a bad feeling through her as she carefully pulled out the tile with the snake on it, placing it carefully into the slot. The light had turned into the area into the door, just like the previous one had. She hesitantly walked into the room, trying to prepare herself for whatever she was about to witness. The light of the lantern faded away. "What are you going to do to my sister?" the young Pinkama cried out from behind the bars of the steel cage. The colt had locked her inside under disguise that they'd be playing pin the tail on the pony. "Don't look so sad, young filly," the colt said with a dazed-over smile. Pinkamania then looked into his eyes and saw nothing, as if the colt had truly had no soul into him. "I'm just going to play one of the most wonderful games with your sister." "She didn't look like she's having fun," Pinkamania called out, trying to look at her sister, who was strapped onto a table. She was crying frantic, trying to pry herself free from the bonds. The straps were so too tight. She could do a little more than twitch in various parts of her body. He knew what he was doing. "Oh, she may not look like it now, but I've played this game with lots of ponies before. Just look around you. I've had so many friends over these years." A wary smile came to his face before it turned back to her. Pinkamania then looked around the room. It was the first time she paid any attention to it. Suddenly the horrifying stench of the room was obvious. It was coming from various states of decay of ponies that had adorned to the room. Most of them were young fillies, a little more than their heads as remained decorations. The colt had dressed the room up for a party, using the bones and skin for the ponies that he had killed. "Stop! No, please!" came the hysterical cries from her sister. The Pinkamania's attention instantly snapped back into what was happening right before her. "That's right, make the noise. It's what I longed for," the colt laughed, as Pinkamania watched, as carefully as he placed the scalpel against her skin, with piercing as he began to cut her away. The scream from her younger sister echoed around the room as the image faded. The flame came to life, illuminating the dark room once more. Tears streamed down Pinky's face, like they had never fell before. "Bellamina," she then sobbed to herself, as she remembered the horrific images of her sister being dissected alive by the colt. She had tossed the memory outside a long time ago, memory that had been too horrific for her to want to remember. Her precious sister had become nothing more than a plaything for that colt. She hiccuped as she gasped for air between sobs. She still had 2 tiles left to go, and she had more memories to remember. She had to remember everything that happened for the sake of her sister. It took her a long time to leave that room, very quietly closing the door behind her. She had to see everything at first, all of it. All she could see was anything. She very quietly walked into the next section of the room and read the text below the yellow square hole. "Soft to touch, soars over its fears, its tail stabilizes." Pinky then took the tile with the bird on it and placed it into the hole. The door appeared just as if the others. She walked inside, staring at the walls as the light once again faded from her lantern. "Come now, you must eat. There's no point in letting yourself go hungry," the colt chuckled to himself, his cold, harsh, cutting laugh. Pinkamania had just curled up in the back of its cage, having her cried her heart out. All remained of her sister was now her lifeless upper half that was still strapped onto the table. She hadn't seen what he'd done with the rest after he had finished. "Here, I even made you this special treat," he said, opening a small hole to the cage, pushing a white plate with a cupcake on it. Pinkamania didn't want this treat. Nothing made by this cruel colt could be truly worth eating. Her stomach let out a growl. She hadn't eaten since breakfast and had hoping to stuff her face with the feast from the party. "See, you're hungry. You should eat it," the colt smiled. Pinkamania's body defied her mind, and it slowly got up and walked over to the cupcake. She sniffed the cupcake carefully, but it was hard to smell anything past the stench of decay in the room. Then she carefully licked the frosting that lay on top of the cupcake. That sweet, sugary taste hit her tongue, almost as if defiance of her mind was telling her. Her mind had screamed out something was wrong. She very carefully opened her mouth and took the bite out of the cupcake. "Good. So glad you're eating it. It would be such a shame if your sister went to waste," the colt chuckled ominously. The flavor of the cupcake hit Pinkamania's sentence like a brick. That wasn't a sweet, sugary cupcake. It was salty and chewy, almost as if the main ingredient had been... The colt laughed as he watched with the expression and the young filly's face in distort. Pinkamania vomited, rushed back to the cage where she coughed and sputtered, trying to get the vial from her mouth. The imposing laugh of the colt hit her ears, causing her tears to return. A loud crash was heard on the top of the staircase leading to the basement. The colt looked up to his surprise, his eyes widening. He suddenly tried to open the cage like a mad beast, as if he had absolutely had to reach Pinkamania. He had managed to open it, and he began to reach a hoof inside, when he was suddenly tackled by another loud figure. There was loud yelling, as if there was a fight was going on. Another large figure appeared before the cage, reaching to try and grab Pinkamania. "No, no!" Pinkamania cried out as she tried to resist the figure from pulling her out of the cage. "It's okay. Don't be afraid. That evil colt cannot hurt you anymore." The voice came from the figure, was comforting, reassuring. It was nothing like that colt's. Pinkamania then looked up fearfully at the figure as it pulled her out of the cage, holding one of its hind legs. The colt had a white coat with striking red hair. He wore a uniform adorned to the blue hat. "It's okay. We're the good guys. We've come to take you home," he said, with a smile as he moved quickly to get her out of the basement. "I was rescued," she said, remembering the light that came back. "But it had been too late. They didn't make it in time to save my sister." Pinky shook her head. "And that vile treat, even though that cupcake was making her stomach turn, it's hard to believe that any pony could be that cruel." She walked back towards the hallway, and even though it continued to bounce in her head, "Those words I spoke in another memory make sense now. After having eaten that, I really didn't feel like ever eating again." She then looked up at the last hole in the wall. Words underneath it read, "A slick texture, a sustenance for most. Its tail propels it forward." Pinky carefully pulled out the last tile, and then it was the picture with the fish on it, placed it onto the hole, and she carefully wiped away a few tears that were forming in her eyes to appear. She carefully walked through, seeing what the last of her hidden memories had to offer.